And welcome back for the final session for Defence Space 2024. One of the themes that's emerged again and again over the last 2 days is the necessity, and I would say the imperative, of us better communicating outside our own bubble chamber of space, be that on the civ side, on the defence side, be that to the general public, to policymakers, politicians. And so I think it's really valuable when we get a refreshing perspective from outside our bubble, outside our sector, because sometimes there are some home truths that we need to take on board and which can actually help us in that long-term path, even though they might be a little bit painful. And I have no insights into what our keynote speaker is going to be saying. I just wanted to frame that there. But for people who are not aware of Tim's work, Tim Marshall, author and broadcaster, I'm going to read through with one tiny edit his entire biography as we have in the programme. So Tim Marshall is the UK's best-selling author on international relations. The author of 8 books, his Prisoners of Geography book has sold more than 2 million copies worldwide and has been translated into more than 20 languages. His latest book, The Future of Geography, is about astropolitics. Tim was a foreign correspondent with Sky News for 30 years before leaving to concentrate on writing and analysis. He's covered conflicts in Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya. During his career, he's been shot with bird pellet in Cairo, hit over the head with a plank of wood in London, bruised by the police in Tehran, arrested by Serbian intelligence, detained in Damascus, declared persona non grata in Croatia, and tear-gassed all over the world. But from his words, nothing compares to being able to go and watch with his family his beloved Leeds United. So, colleagues, could we please give a space community welcome to Tim Marshall? Thank you.
Of course. Thank you very much. I should start by saying L812985 SAC Marshall, sir, ma'am. Which should tell you that I am an amateur in a room of professionals and a generalist in a room of experts. So please bear that in mind. I'm acutely aware that anything pretty much I can say you probably already know, but maybe I can say it in a different way. I was quite alarmed when that lovely introduction said you didn't have a clue what I was about to say, and I thought, yeah, you're not the only one. Make it up as we go along, up to a point. Thank you for the invitation. Do bear with me. I'll start with some homilies, a bit of history, possibly a dad joke, and then I'll try and get to the point. That's my opening remark. That's why you're going to win the argument, because you're pushing at an open door. We have always loved this space. We have always been fascinated by it, and we have always wanted to go somewhere where we can't, whether it's an ocean or the top of a mountain. As soon as we can, we do. And it's the same with space, and I think it's worth hanging on to that you will win this argument. I don't think you're putting the argument particularly well. Either that, or I don't think the media gets it enough, but I promise you the media, which is your route to your budgets, is desperate for more, but more things that you might not want to give them. So, a bit of history. In the book I wrote, Future of Geography, I do a bit of the homilies, and then I go through the science of what got us to where we are and why I'm confident you will win the argument. Starter for 10, anyone know who that is? Copernicus. And here's the dad joke, because he was one of the people that freed us from the gods and the ghosts to allow us that science can explain things. And we can thank his parents, because they said to him when he was just a young boy, you know, Nicholas, the sun doesn't go around you. Thank you. But it's an example of this acceleration of science. And science has brought us to technology, and technology has brought us to where we are. and technology, science, and politics go together. And of course, we have now brought our politics and our international relations into our new domain. It was inevitable, and it's one of the most fascinating areas. And again, you've got a great story to tell. Framing. I think we should be framing where we are now in many ways, but including in a historical way, starting with this. Which all you know, of course, is Sputnik. And that's when the world sat up and took notice that, oh, space is part of international relations. It's part of the dynamic of where we are. And I do actually believe we're in a new Cold War, and I think we're going back to a form of bipolar world, which people will be forced to take sides. It'll be very different to the previous one, but I think as framing goes, it's useful. And it's useful to frame where this industry is militarily within that perspective. By the way, this is the American response to Sputnik about 3 days later. And some of the headlines the next day were Sputnik, which is fair, but it showed the difference between the two systems. I mean, of course, the Russians had loads of incidents like that, but of course, no fool would ever dare put it on television. But in the open society that is America, it was on the nightly news. And the media lapped up all the space stuff. They absolutely loved it. And again, the Americans, because the media loved it and the political class understood the importance of space, framed it within the Cold War. Now, you'll all be aware of Kennedy's famous speech, "We go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard." He went on to become Mayor Quimby in The Simpsons, if you've ever seen that. I came across a different speech, which I just loved, because it's the reason why the Americans got to the moon first. It's Kennedy again, but this is to, I think, both houses of Congress, when he absolutely spells out why they're going to the moon.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take.
That's the key, which road they should take. He knew they had to win the space race as part of the Cold War to prove their system was better, their drive was better, their technology was better. They were prepared to spend what it took because this was front and central battleground. And I don't think we've made that argument yet outside of the military and the commercial industry. So the Americans won it. And then, well, you know the story, Apollo 11 brought back some rocks, so did 12, 14, so did 15, so did 16. Apollo 17 brought back some rocks, and Nixon said, "What's with the rocks? We don't need any more rocks." And there was no reason to go back. There really wasn't, so they pulled the plug, went off in a different direction. Again, now we're not telling the story. There are 3 imperatives to go back and to be in space and to invest in this. It is defense, it is science, and it is now increasingly commercial. But it just seems to be a reasonably well-kept secret. But the framing, I believe, should be that the satellites, and to an extent other elements, are part of our national security critical infrastructure. Most members of the public, and even some politicians, understand that water supply is part of critical infrastructure, electricity supply, critical infrastructure. But I don't think people are aware that so are the satellites. They're not aware, and neither is the public. I think we have the 3rd most satellites of any country in the world. I think it's Russia, USA, Russia, and then the UK, which is a legacy of empire. Well, actually, a legacy of the end of empire. So I think we're partially keeping it a secret. I think you are partially keeping it a secret. You're partially not selling it. And then there is the, well, why should anybody take any notice? It's a very crowded area of, there's 1,000 stories every day, and you can only cover, in TV terms, about 6. In newspapers, about 25. So it's difficult, but I will come up towards the end with a couple of suggestions. When I wrote the book, Everett Dolman, who you may know about, I believe he's the doyen of astropolitical thinking, lectures at the War College in the United States. He was very, very generous with his time for the book. You may know of Halford Mackinder's Heartland Theory. He's updated it for the 21st century. If you control low Earth orbit, you control near Earth space, the bit between low Earth orbit and the ground. If you do that, you're going to dominate Earth, and if you dominate the Earth, obviously you determine the future. Now, no one country is going to, but again, you need to make the argument when you're looking for your budgets to saying, if we do not compete here, and if we are not a leading world power, we will fall behind. It's all part of our, not just prestige, but our ability to do what we're doing. When you go out and try and sell it, whether it's in small meetings to get the budgets and in the policy makers, or it's, and I think this is equally important, within the media, because if the media picks up the interest, the politicians feel the need. I mean, it was when Nixon pulled the plug on partially pulled the plug on NASA, it coincided with a severe reduction in interest. When Apollo 17 took off, they offered to broadcast it live, well, they offered a live feed, and none of the US networks took it, none of them, because they didn't care anymore. And if the public doesn't care anymore, the politicians don't care anymore. So you have to make that two-pronged attack, the genuine critical infrastructure, security, future of warfare approach, and your electorate are interested in this. One of the ways I try and sell it is through the geography of space. I think people understand there is a geography to space. I personally don't want to go through the radiation belt. You can have the Sea of Tranquility, because any fool can land there. I want the South Pole of the Moon, because that's where the water is. There's a geography of space, and when you explain it, a lot of people say, oh yeah, okay, right, and that's why we should go. That's why we should do what we're doing. I particularly like L5, because that's apparently where the first space city is going to be. I'm very disappointed there isn't another Earth at L3, because that was the great sci-fi story until some idiot sent a probe around the back of the sun and there was nothing there. It was very, very upsetting. But again, when you talk about things like L1 and L2 and you say, oh, well, you know what Lagrange points are, all of you, and that L2 is where the James Webb is, where the Chinese are looking at, and we better get there as well because there's only so much space at L2. When you're making all these arguments in a really hopefully simple way, I did ask earlier if I could use a particular swear word. I think it's in German. So if you could translate it. I said, when you're explaining these things in public, please don't speak bollocks. And for our American friends, if you could translate that. What I mean by that is when whoever you push out into the media, or even actually to the politicians, don't start talking about SDI and SDA and space situational awareness, because nobody knows what you're talking about. They've not got a clue. It's like economics editors when they come on the 9 o'clock news and talk about laissez-faire economics. Why are you speaking French? Do you really think your audience knows what laissez-faire economics are? So again, when you're talking to your comms people, forgive my vernacular again, do tell them to stop talking bollocks. It really helps. You hear it all the time on the media. And, I know every profession has its jargon, has its diminutives for concepts and for things that you all work with. Just don't use them when you're talking to people other than fellow professionals. So all the way up to now and this new world, and how our publics are not aware particularly of the new world, how our politicians aren't being taught enough about the new world, the Chinese balloon that got shot down. Now I know it was a complete accident by the Chinese and the weather just happened to blow it over the American base and then the winds dropped for 2 hours. Yeah, I get that. Pure coincidence. Scenario. Let's suppose there'd been people on it. I know it was uncrewed. Let's suppose it had, as I understand it, and please tell me if I'm wrong and tell me some state secrets later, any American senior officers, it had comms kit going up to a satellite and probably bouncing back down to somewhere in China. Just suppose for a moment it had been crewed, and just suppose for a moment, unbeknownst even to the Chinese, they were actually over something that was seriously national security, something to do with nuclear code or whatever. And they didn't even know, but they would eventually work it out. And you need to shoot it down right now. Are you going to? What are the laws? What's the jamming? What's the scenarios? Have we gamed them all out? And now we really haven't gamed all these scenarios out. And our politicians aren't even aware that we need to game these scenarios out. But just for a bit of fun, I got hold of the actual genuine audio of the pilot that shot it down. The footage is CGI. It's not, there is no footage of it, but this is actually the audio of the pilot shooting it down.
Selected Eagle support region. Angels as desired. Point COI 1 Charlie Zulu 5. The brain. Attack heading 140 profile. It's 1.3 knots. Climbing 50K delivery. 5 miles. Rank 1, flat foot. That is a king killer. The balloon is complete.
Now, obviously, it was well within United States legal rights to do that, and they did wait until it went over the sea before they shot it down. But I only put it up there as one of these new things that we're not really used to. You know, spy balloons with satcoms able to send possibly live pictures. And I don't think we've woken up outside of this room to all these different scenarios. I think the first space war, and again, when you're out selling your ideas, I think this is the first space war, Russia-Ukraine, because I know the Gulf War, obviously, most of the guided missiles were guided by SATs. But this is the first conflict I can think of, state to state, in which both sides have access to space assets. Obviously, we know about the Russians, and then the Brits, the Americans, and many other of our friends have given the Ukrainians facilities. And then, of course, there's Mr. Musk. Now, this is brand new, I would have thought. Mr. Musk, this is the Irpin region. They lost internet access because the ground stations went out the first few days of the war. Mr. Musk, in the kindness of his heart, flew in tens of thousands of, they genuinely are called Dishy McFlat faces. Seriously, because they're flat, they're not curved dishes, to receive the signal from his Starlink, which is up there. It's, I think it's about $22 a month to get the internet via it. And of course, you can then direct the internet to wherever you want in the world. So, of course, the Ukrainians immediately picked up on it and got themselves back on all the games that the teenagers play and anything else they needed the internet for. And, of course, the Ukrainian military jumped on it to help them to target Russian troops and kill them. So I put it to you, members of the jury. Is Elon Musk's Starlink a legitimate military target? I don't know. Is it? I'm not sure all the lawyers know. Oh, it is. Okay, supposing it's, well, is his headquarters in America a legitimate target? Okay. If you shoot your satellite down and it falls on New York City, is that a legitimate military? I don't think we've really talked about this and thought about this enough. And I know there's some very good lawyers working on it, but I have absolute certainty that the politicians have no idea about any of these ideas and concepts. Again, as you probably know, Mr. Putin immediately began dazzling and spoofing Starlink. Of course he did. Why wouldn't he? Now, in their communiques, they never mentioned Starlink, but they made it very clear in the messaging, without mentioning Starlink, that they do regard it as a legitimate military target. And they've been playing cat and mouse ever since. This is new. This is obviously satellites have been a commercial, and it's not just military satellites that are used by the military. But this was the first incident I can remember where this has been used. Now, Musk didn't send them there for a military purpose, and you probably know the story that he actually would not extend the range of Starlink so they could do underwater drone attack on the Navy in the Black Sea, because that would have been an overt offer of military assistance, whereas this was supposedly to help the civilians. But these are new times. Most people don't know that these things exist, the ones that were doing some of the dazzling. But there's something new that's come along to shoot down drones. Now, you can either shoot down a drone with a $200,000 missile, or 100,000, I think it is, with the Iron Dome ones, that are big in action at the moment. Or you could use $1 worth of electricity and use one of these, which the Americans have perfected. It was a brilliant bit of skill by the MOD, if anybody's here. Last year, when the Brits announced that we've got this stuff as well, the MOD wrote a very good memo saying, British first. And then some of the media fell for it, and the story was as if we'd invented this tech. Whereas in fact, it was just the first time that we got the tech and used it, even though the Americans did it, really. But it was a great, great press release, and some of the media fell for it. Again, CGI, I don't know, but open source suggests 8 miles range, burns out the drone. Now, you also know that 4 countries have done this. They have launched a ballistic missile from the surface of the Earth, and they have blown up one of their own satellites to test if they could blow up another one of their satellites, perhaps, or somebody else's. India, China, US, Russia. So, that's hitting a bullet with a bullet, and it's incredibly expensive. Just stick one of those lasers on the satellite. There's no atmosphere to get in the way, and rain and clouds. There's no problem with range. Why wouldn't you do such a thing? It's not even against the law, such as law is, because the law, such as it is, talks about weapons of mass destruction, and that's not a weapon of mass destruction. So on you go. Now, obviously, you don't want to do that. The first bloke who ever came out of a cave with a really big spear that was shinier than everybody else's, you know, every single other bloke in every single other cave, well, I want one of those, which is exactly what will happen when the first nation puts a laser on a satellite. And a nation will put a laser on a satellite. Why wouldn't they? Can you give me a single example of a new domain of warfare where we have not then thrown everything that we've got into that new domain of warfare? You can't. We always do it. We will arm our satellites. I don't know if it's next year or in 10 years, but we will do it. The French are already talking about bodyguard satellites. The Russians, as you know, have fired some sort of projectile out of one of their mini satellites. No one, well, actually, there may be people in this room who know exactly what it is, but most of us have no idea what it was. So it's going to happen. And we haven't got any laws about this and about many, many other things. Space debris, I thought militarizing space would be the thing that kept the experts that I spoke to awake at night when I was researching the book. It was space debris. Thank goodness for stuff like this, it's coming, apparently. I used to have a Vespa when I was a teenager. It didn't look anything like that. But that is dual use, isn't it? That's dual use technology. Now, supposing you're creeping up behind my satellite that happens to have some of my nuclear early warning system in it, and I wonder, what the hell are you doing that for? I do write in the book, it wouldn't be a very good film, would it? Because it takes about, 18 hours to get to position yourself into the orbit to then creep up behind it. It'd be a very, very long film. But how close can one satellite be to another? What's the law on that? Have you got a red hot line saying, excuse me, you've come within 4 miles. Now you're in with 2 miles. I don't think you have. Hang on, this has got grappling hooks on it. Why? These are the scenarios that are coming, and lasers. So if only we had an outer space treaty to deal with these things that wasn't written in the 1960s when there were no lasers, to quote Austin Powers. Elon Musk had only just been born. There were only a handful of countries with satellites. There's 80 countries with satellites now. There was only X hundred, possibly 1,000 satellites. Now there's 8,500. There are due to be minimum, apparently, conservative estimates, 30,000 by the end of the decade, possibly 60,000. It's getting crowded out there. So how close can one satellite be to another? Who regulates who's going to do space debris cleanup with grappling hooks and all the other things? What's the status of lasers? Because they're not in that treaty. We urgently, urgently need a new outer space treaty. I'm not entirely convinced that there is such a thing as international law. There's just some rules and regulations that you choose to abide by sometimes and not at other times, or interpret in certain ways. I'm particularly interested in the Northern Sea route at the moment and Russia's new interpretation of what inland waters are. That's another subject for those that drive boats. I love saying that to naval people because they hate being called boats, don't you?
You looked up that.
But if you're driving a boat through, no, it's a different subject. So all that stuff is now. It's not the future. It's now. And I don't think at policy level we're talking about it enough. And we're going back because now there is an imperative. There is a scientific imperative to go back. There is a military imperative to go back. And there is a commercial imperative because they found water at the South Pole. They found titanium. They found possibly lithium. They found lots of stuff, of the very stuff we need for the 21st century technology, which will power, our weapons systems, but also our green technology. It takes an awful lot of rare earth metals. I don't know why they're called rare earth metals, because there's quite a lot of them, but it takes a lot of it just for one wing of those things that go round and round and create electricity. Completely what they're called. India got there first. Last year they landed on the South Pole, which is quite a feat to do. The Russians tried, didn't quite work out, and that's because they did it in a hurry. By the way, the Indians landed on the opening day of the G20 summit, which just by coincidence was held in New Delhi. Timing is everything. But allegedly we're going back, and this brings me to another point about framing, calling it national infrastructure, and comms. Allegedly, in 2026, the Americans will land on the moon again, and a man and a woman will walk on the moon. Now, I suspect, because they may have got some advisors in from HS2, so it could slip. I reckon it will slip 2027, but I think they will do it. And I think even if it's let me rephrase that. Not even if it's Mr. Trump. If it's Mr. Trump or Ms. Harris, I think they'll probably keep the budgets going. It was Trump that introduced Space Force. Kamala Harris was given space by Biden because actually he wasn't that interested in it. And she's not made any noises that I can see that suggest she wants to pull back from this. And there's your chance, there's your opening. Because if the Americans do this, it's going to be a massive story. Because A, it'll be in HD, because you don't know how hard we had it growing up. We had to watch the space landings in black and white. It was awful. This time it'll be in color, HD, great comms, man and a woman. It's popcorn time. And if it's going to happen, there's your chance to get in and sell what the hell is going on in space, and not talk, and speak human when you're doing it. And then allegedly 2032, China and America will both have bases. I'm pretty confident that will slip, but I also do think there will be bases, even though I know there's budgetary issues, which are getting worse. But I think they will be there in the 2030s. And I think I'll end where I started, which is that human interest in the unknown is what will keep us interested, and you can push at an open door. Again, let's get out there and sell the fact that we're in Space NATO, or whatever you want to call it. I know it's a civilian adventure. That's the good news. All this stuff that's coming might be Greek to me, but AI and all the rest of it is going to bring some incredible things. And again, the excitement that you can generate and the enthusiasm you can have for space is incredible. And there's so many different ways of selling it. A, speak human. B, frame it in the right way. And C, give little stories that tell you about what you might be missing. When the first elevator was invented, I think it was in Chicago, like 1880s, it was invented for a factory to bring stuff up a couple of floors. And this is great, you know, we don't need to haul things up by the stairs. And of course, it doesn't take long to think, I could build a building that people could live in. And within 10 years, America's urban landscape was totally transformed with skyscrapers because someone invented a lift. That's not why they invented it. And there's going to be all sorts of stuff that are happening in space, the medical experiments that are going on, etc. All the work that's being done in the International Space Station, which reminds me of my last dad joke. I told one of the astronauts who read Future of Geography and found it very hard to put down. Thank you. Finally, Kepler knew that 400 years ago. So you're pushing at an open door. Last thing I wanted to say was about access. Again, if you're trying to sell stuff, and this is particularly for the defense. The Americans are much better at this than we are. They allow in journalists to sensitive areas. Now, we've always been 15, 20 years. I mean, MI6 didn't even exist until about 20 years ago. Now it has a de facto press officer. The Americans have always been more open about this. Now, they're not stupid. They don't let you see everything. But I read articles in the American press, and I think I read one about the base in Colorado a few months ago, where they invited in a fairly big journal, New York Times or whatever. And it was a fascinating piece, not just for what I learned, but also, and down this corridor, there was a door that they said, we can't go in there. And it makes me think, ooh, which readers love. And there was this and there was that they couldn't film, and that first name terms only. You think, ooh, because, you know, readers like boom. Now, I've been in 5 floors underneath the MOD with a camera. I've been in the old GCHQ with a camera. I've been in the new GCHQ without a camera. I've been in 1 or 2 of the buildings dotted around London. I've been that nice, great thing at Regent's Park. I've seen things in there which I don't repeat. So UK Space Command, here's a challenge for you. Let's not, well, actually, if you could let me go as well. You get a journalist that you know you can trust. Doesn't mean they're a patsy, it just means they're grown up. Get them down into Space Command. You wouldn't let me go down when I was researching the book, and I respect that. And I used to work there nearly 50 years ago when I was SAC, 8129865 SAC Marshal. I used to work there at Strike Command, and they still wouldn't let me go down. Get a grown-up newspaper journalist. The words a journalist love more than anything other than pay your eyes is exclusive. And if you're the first journalist down in Space Command, it's a Sunday Times magazine, whatever. And then, once you've sparked, because the journalists all read all the other media, once you've sparked that, then offer the first camera. Because if we have TV, you don't care about bloody newspapers. Then get the first camera down, and you will get a lot of interest. You will spark interest. So just open up a bit more. But just put a dust sheet over anything you don't want them to see. It's quite easy. I've gone over time by 2 minutes 58, which is almost documentary in television terms. So I shall end by hitting you with my bullet points again. Framing, national security infrastructure. 2026 is a real op. Anytime's a real op. If we do the first direct-to-centre launch from Scotland this year, which might happen, or next year, if UK is the first European country to do it, get some other stuff out at the same time. Give a bit of access. Do explain to the politicians what the hell's going on in short words with not too many syllables in them. That will help your budgets. Tell them what's coming. Tell them, do you really want to get left behind? And also tell them it's inevitable. So don't stand in the way. Embrace it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim.